Coming up today, the top nuclear envoys of South Korea, the United States and Japan hold talks on how to end North Korea's nuclear ambitions. President Park Geun-hye and the leaders of 4 Central European countries agree to take their economic cooperation to the next level. Plus, US President Barack Obama says the mass shooting in California could be terrorism after more heavy weapons are found in the suspect's home. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Friday, December 4th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this morning, the top nuclear envoys from South Korea, the United States and Japan held talks in Washington on Thursday on ways to deal with North Korea's nuclear program. Seoul Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs Park Geun-hye arrived in Washington on Wednesday local time for the strategy session with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts. U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Policy Sung Kim hosted the trilateral meeting that also involved Kimihiro Ishikane, Director of the Asian Affairs Bureau of Japan's Foreign Ministry. Now, details of Thursday's meeting were not immediately available, but the 3 countries were expected to exchange their views on the current situation and discuss ways to induce changes in North Korea's attitude. Prior to the meeting, Hwang held separate bilateral talks with both the US and Japanese nuclear envoys. The trilateral meeting is the first of its kind in 7 months since the last gathering in Seoul back in May. President Park Geun-hye has held a summit with the leaders of the so-called Visegrad Group, an economic bloc made up of the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary and Poland. Our Hwang Sang-hee, who is travelling with the president, files this report from Prague.
In their first summit, President Park and leaders from the Visegrad Group vowed stronger multilateral economic cooperation.
오늘 한 비세그라드 협력이라는 새로운 차원의 협력을 만들므로써 더욱 다층적이고 다면적인 파트너십을 발전시켜 나아갈 수 있는 터전을 마련하였습니다.
The Visegrad Group is comprised of the Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia and Poland, which are 4 of the fastest-growing European Union nations. One of the key agreements in their joint statement is opening up Central Europe's booming infrastructure market to Korean businesses. The Visegrad Group has secured roughly 40% of the EU fund and will invest $43 billion on large infrastructure projects like subway constructions in the coming years.
우리 정상들은 에너지 및 인프라 분야에서의 미래 지향적 파트너십을 강화하기 위해 에너지 분야 협력 모색을 위한 대화 추진과 인프라 고위급 회의 설치에 합의를 하였습니다.
The Visegrad Group reaffirmed their support for the peaceful reunification of the 2 Koreas, strongly condemning North Korea's nuclear weapons program. The South Korean leader also called on the European nations to share their experience of successfully transitioning from a socialist economy to a market economy for securing peace on the Korean peninsula. President Park will depart for Seoul on Friday, wrapping up her 7-day tour. The latest trip, which took her to France and the Czech Republic, was the last presidential trip of the year. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News, Prague.
Now, US President Barack Obama has admitted this week's mass shooting in Southern California could have been an act of terrorism. Speaking at the White House on Thursday, Obama said US authorities were still trying to figure out what motivated the attack in San Bernardino that left 14 people dead and more than 20 injured. He also raised the possibility the shooting was workplace-related. The 2 suspects, Saeed Farouk and Tashfeen Malik, were killed during a shootout with police. And while their motive does essentially remain a mystery, police say they found an arsenal of weaponry in the suspects' rented home, suggesting they might have been planning another attack had they not been shot dead. The feud between Russia and Turkey is continuing to deepen over Turkey's downing of a Russian warplane last week. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Thursday dismissed Russian claims his country was benefiting from oil trade with the Islamic State militant group. The Turkish leader instead pointed fingers at Russia, saying that he had evidence Moscow was involved in illegal oil trade with the extremist group. Now, a statement comes a day after Russia's defense ministry displayed satellite images it said showed trucks loaded with oil crossing from ISIS-held territory in Iraq and Syria into Turkey. During his annual State of the Nation address on Thursday, President Putin said Turkey's downing of a Russian warplane was a war crime, and he vowed to punish them with additional sanctions. The European Central Bank has slashed one of its key interest rates to a new record low. On Thursday, the bank's governing council cut the deposit rate from negative 0.2% to negative 0.3%. The rate cut takes effect next Wednesday and is expected to encourage banks to lend more to consumers and businesses. Interest rates of main refinancing operations and the marginal lending facility will remain the same, however, at 0.5% and 0.3% respectively. At a press conference following the rate announcement, ECB President Mario Draghi said the central bank will also extend its bond buying program until March 2017 or beyond to fight deflation. The Korean economy grew at the fastest pace in more than 5 years in the third quarter, helped by stronger consumer spending and a boom in the construction industry. And while that is good in itself, many expect the nation to struggle to reach the government's annual growth target of 3%. Park Geun-hye has this report.
Customers are busy digging up goods at a massive sales event. The promotional campaign led by local retailers comes after the Korean government launched a similar Black Friday event back in October.
I came out to buy what my daughter needs, and I was satisfied with the discount rate and the variety of products.
On the back of such government measures to jumpstart spending, Korea's economy expanded at the fastest pace in more than 5 years. The Bank of Korea says it grew 1.3% in the July to September period from the previous quarter, despite the country's traditional growth engine exports losing steam.
Net exports dragged down third-quarter growth by 0.8 of a percentage point. Domestic demand, on the other hand, contributed to growth by 2 percentage points, up 1.4 percentage points from a quarter earlier, driving up overall growth.
But the outlook when it comes to meeting the government's growth target of 3% for this year does not look bright. To reach that goal, the economy has to expand around 2% on quarter in the last 3 months of this year, which experts say is very unlikely to happen.
The extra money that the government pumped into the economy had a major impact on third-quarter growth, but that effect will be diluted in the fourth quarter. Also, there will be a high base effort from Q3.
Korea's central bank expects the economy to grow 2.7% this year, and to do so, it needs to expand 0.8% in the last quarter. In the face of the lingering uncertainties from China's slowing economy and a possible rate hike by the U.S. Federal Reserve this month, widely expected to cause turmoil in emerging economies, some experts are even skeptical about whether Korea will be able to achieve 3% growth next year. Park Geun-hye, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's Fair Trade Commission has lifted 18 regulations that were imposed on meat, parking lots and online games, to name just a few. For more on the government's latest move to facilitate fair competition and revitalise the economy in line with President Park Geun-hye's deregulation drive, Connie Kim reports.
T-bone steaks produced domestically were generally not available at marts or supermarkets because of a regulation that bars sales and production of pork and beef with combined cuts.
Only separate beef and pork cuts came in for sale. We were only allowed to sell parts of beef and pork separately.
However, with the lifting of the regulation by the Fair Trade Commission, local meat producers and sellers will now be able to compete on a more fair ground.
Consumers will have access to diverse goods at reasonable prices. Locally produced meat will compete on the same grounds with imported meat.
Besides this regulation, 17 others have been lifted in line with President Park Geun-hye's deregulation drive to revitalize the country's economy and create more jobs. Hot spring spas will no longer need to have an indoor swimming pool to get an operation license. By cutting down building costs, the government aims to promote hot spring spas into must-visit destinations. Parking lots will also benefit from these measures. Once spaces reserved for cars only, these parking lots will serve as venues for temporary open markets with a permit from local governments. The country's fast-growing online game market is expected to get a boost too. Gamers will be able to spend up to about $430 in game-related purchases on cyberspace, up $170 from the current limit. Korea expects to see $670 million worth of investment and generate some 800 new jobs with the lifting of regulations. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, one of the biggest challenges of the ongoing UN climate change conferences in Paris is narrowing the often opposing views held by developed and developing countries. This difference of opinion is being fueled by new data that shows massive inequality between the two in terms of CO2 emissions. Kwon Soo-ah has the details.
The effects of climate change are becoming more and more apparent around the globe. Korea, for example, is likely to be affected by the world's third strongest Super El Niño event this winter, expected to bring warmer temperatures and more snow. Like this, global warming has become a personal matter for everyone and every country that's currently in the midst of heightened discussions at the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris.
Let me be very clear. Never in history have there been so many heads of state and government under one roof, in one day, brought together for one topic, for one challenge. Never.
That's also why the challenge is to get those representatives' opinions on the same page, as Korea's environment minister currently at the COP21 says.
The biggest issues are whether the Paris climate deal will be legally binding or not, and how to differentiate between emerging and advanced countries when it comes to distributing their responsibilities. As of Thursday, there has been no significant progress on that front.
Leaders of developing countries, such as India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, stressed that advanced countries have caused today's climate crisis since industrialization days, saying they should be burdened more in reducing CO2 emissions. But then, India is currently the fourth biggest CO2 emitter, not to mention China, not yet classified as an advanced country, the #1 emitter. Nevertheless, a recent report by British charity Oxfam backs the opinion of developing nations, saying climate change is totally related to economic inequality and that it's a crisis driven by CO2 emissions of the haves and that impacts the have-nots the hardest. According to the report, the wealthiest 10% of the world are responsible for half of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Kwon Soo-ah, Arirang News.
Now, FIFA seems to be taking steps in the right direction to clean up its tarnished image. The organization's executive committee has unanimously approved wide-ranging reforms, which include limiting FIFA presidents to a maximum 12 years in charge. The scandal-ridden World Football governing body will also ensure at least 6 women sit on the executive committee, 1 for every continent. The proposals, which will also reduce the power of the executive committee, will be presented in February to FIFA's Congress. A controversial proposal to expand the World Cup from 32 to 40 teams has also been shelved for now. Critics of the idea say it would make the tournament less manageable and the quality of football would suffer. Well, that's all we have for now on this Friday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome. Thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Goodbye.